Hello! Welcome. So, for this, the second in this series of videos, I'm going to continue going through all of the starships that appear on screen in the Star Wars films, this time looking at The Empire Strikes Back. This time it'll be somewhat different from before, as I'm only counting the first appearance of new ships, meaning those first seen in A New Hope I'll be skipping as I've already covered them. For all of the ships that make their first appearance in A New Hope, hit the first video up here, or via the link in the description below. And just like before, the canonicity of some of this information can be called into question ever since Disney announced the reboot of the expanded universe. And finally, I'm using the special edition versions of the original trilogy because more ships than that, or at least better looking versions of the ships. And once again, I'll be giving brief honourable nods to the worthy repulsorcraft that pop up throughout the film. Without further ado, number 1. The first unique starship to appear in The Empire Strikes Back is an Imperial Class 2 Star Destroyer. This new class of capital ship differs from its predecessor in a number of ways. It's not just a new and improved ILM model. Known colloquially as an Imp Star Deuce, the ship had a reinforced hull, improved deflector shields, and a much greater firepower thanks to the quad turbo lasers and ion cannons of the previous Class 1 model being replaced by batteries of 8-barreled laser cannons in barbette mountings. Jumping ahead a little and out of the universe briefly, in this shot that appears later on we can see the Avenger, the Stalker and the Tyrant. Charming names. Awesome names. Now, going back, the problem lies in identifying which of these ships, if any, is the one we see here in the opening shot, launching the probe that would go on to discover the location of the rebels. Without seeing who is in command, it's pretty much impossible to tell just from the film. The fact that they all turn up in the Hoth system later means it's likely one of them that can claim responsibility, right? The answer eludes us when you consider the fact that there's a few bits of contradicting reference material out there. Deleted dialogue from the NPR radio dramatization of The Empire Strikes Back reveals that the Avenger is the one that successfully found the base. Conversely, the Star Wars Encyclopedia by Steve Sansweet claims that it was the Stalker that launched the probe, as does the "so awesome I couldn't believe my luck when I got this as a 13-year-old" Behind the Magic CD-ROM from 1998. Ah, that Biggs on Tatooine footage. Anyway, in conclusion, most sources actually claim that it was the Stalker that launched the probe to the Hoth system, meaning the first ship we see here is the Stalker. It also launched additional probes to scout the nearby All-Ewan and Tok'Maya systems. The Stalker would later go on to disable the last rebel transport attempting to escape Hoth, but more on that later. Okay, honourable mentions. Speaking of probes, hyperdrive pods are the actual crafts that are launched by the Empire here, and inside them are Viper probot droids being ferried to their destinations to scan for rebel activity. It's likely the Empire launched thousands of these pods across the galaxy in their mission to seek out the whereabouts of the Alliance. Next up we see an Incom T-47 airspeeder. This low altitude repulsor craft definitely gets a mention, as the rebels were able to modify the vehicle's weapons and cold climate functionality and put them to use as assault snowspeeders on Hoth. Designed primarily for industrial cargo handling, its cockpit featured positions for a forward-facing pilot and a rear-facing cargo manager. The magnetic harpoon and tow cable on the rear existed originally to control repulsor lift cargo modules, but as we all know ended up being creatively used to bring down several AT-AT walkers during the Battle of Hoth. Number 2. And 3. Next up, as mentioned earlier, we see a few more Class 2 Star Destroyers, and since we now know the Stalker appeared first, the Avenger and Tyrant are technically the second and third unique ships to appear in the film. The Avenger is a prestigious and well-known Star Destroyer that will later go on to chase down and lose the Falcon in the asteroid field. Captain Needa will of course assume full responsibility for losing them and apologise to Lord Vader. Yeah, I'm sure it'll be fine, mate. The Tyrant is the Star Destroyer we see attempting to intercept the very first transports fleeing from Hoth. It quickly becomes disabled due to a few hits from Torren Farr's V-150 ion cannon, allowing a number of ships to escape unharmed. So not so much a Tyrant, but more a Tired, forget it. Oh, and I also believe that one of these distant ships here is the Devastator from A New Hope, as during this time it is now part of Death Squadron, Vader's personal flotilla. Number 4. So, during the same scene, we get a very brief glimpse of a TIE surface assault bomber. Less manoeuvrable than the other TIE models, this starfighter was used primarily for destroying large ships via precision bombing runs. The TIE bomber had 2 hulls, one for the pilots and one that stored multiple general-purpose warhead launchers, allowing the craft to carry various weapons for use in different kinds of mission objectives. Payloads included concussion missiles, proton torpedoes, proton rockets, space mines, proton bombs and thermal detonators. The Two hulls were located between its curved wings, a feature inherited from the TIE Advance prototype we see Vader fly in the last film. This wing shape increased the surface area of solar ionization paneling, which in turn provided a higher output that accommodated for the increased mass of the craft. Due to their unique and rather large frame, they were often considered relatively easy targets by Rebel pilots. Though the TIE bombers were agile, they were slower and less manoeuvrable than the standard TIE fighters, and like most mass-produced TIEs, it lacked any kind of shielding, though it partly compensated for this by possessing a stronger hull and came equipped with life support systems and a cockpit ejection seat. Moreover, standard Imperial regulations required that the bombers be escorted by other starfighters when engaged in a combat scenario. Designed by Scion Fleet Systems, TIE bombers saw extensive use throughout the Galactic Civil War, paving the way for many variants and developments on the functions and designs of its features. Number 5. So in the same scene, we have the first appearance of an Executor-class Star Dreadnought called the Executor. By this point in the saga, this is Darth Vader's personal flagship, having handed control of the prestigious Devastator over to a subordinate and integrated it into the Executor's escort fleet. Initially designed by Kuat Drive Yards, the most prolific military shipbuilding manufacturer in the galaxy, the Executor was 19,000 meters long, 12 times larger and completely eclipsing the Imperial-class Star Destroyers. At the time of its construction, it was one of the largest traditional warships to have ever existed in the galaxy. A titanium-reinforced alloy steel hull surrounded a massive, habitable, city-like structure which accommodated the command, control, operation and habitat decks. In the centre of this technoscape stood the command tower, which housed the deflector shield and communication sensor domes, briefing rooms, officers' quarters, escape pods, and the bridge. The bridge design mirrored that of the smaller Star Destroyers, a command walkway separating twin crewman pits and a series of tall, transparent steel viewports offering an unobstructed view of space. The Executor had 5,000 weapon emplacements in total, consisting of turbo laser batteries, ion cannons, concussion missiles, laser point defense cannons, and numerous tractor beam projectors. With the combined weight of its firepower, it was able to bombard a planet's surface from orbit, and the Executor's presence alone was enough to frighten entire star systems into submission. Boasting around 279,000 crew, the ship had legions of stormtroopers, gunners, officers and droids on board. In the old expanded universe, the ship was constructed in secret in the secluded Skarl system. It was here that Vader utilised the unfinished ship as a training ground for a secret apprentice, Galen Marek, aka Starkiller, in an eventual unsuccessful ploy to overthrow the Emperor. A great tale, unlikely to make its way back into canon. And while we're in expanded universe territory, I have to add the Executor also destroyed Prince Shizor's Skyhook Station in Shadows of the Empire, a story I touched on very briefly in the last video, and one that I think could possibly see making its return to the new canon one day, maybe even to the big screen a few years down the line. Hey, I can hope, right? And I'll never stop hoping for that. Number 6. Finally moving away from the Imperial fleet scene, here inside Echo Base we get the first shot of a GR-75 medium transport, not to be confused with the GR-45. Manufactured by Gallifrey Yards, these transport ships were originally intended to exist merely as cargo transports. Inside the thick outer hull was an open space designed exclusively for filling up with cargo. The ship could carry 19,000 metric tons in its 90 meters length, with the extra space for passengers often being converted into more cargo space. The Rebel Alliance utilised the ship due to the low cost and availability of spare parts. The shell-like hull of the vessel was impenetrable to sensors for the most part, and the Rebels had equipped their transports with further jamming technology. This aided the Rebel cause when ferrying supplies between cells or to assist in missions. In this film, the transport ships were to be relied upon in ensuring the successful evacuation of Rebel forces from Hoth. Ships such as the Quantum Storm, the transport we see escaping past the Tyrant earlier on, the first of the lucky ones. Unlike number 7, a GR-75 transport named Bright Hope, the last remaining transport on Hoth. Torren Farr, the rebel we see operating the ion cannon that disabled the Tyrant earlier on, is part of the last batch of rebels dependent on this ship for escape. Though overloaded with passengers, the Bright Hope left Hoth escorted by 6 X-Wing starfighters, but despite the heavy escort, the ship, unfortunately, or fortunately depending on whose side you're on, was intercepted by multiple Imperial ships, including both the Executor, yeah, good luck with that, and as I mentioned earlier, the Stalker. A good day for the Stalker this. The attack from multiple Imperial ships had ripped open the Bright Hope's hull, leaving the majority of decks exposed to space. Left drifting helpless and without power, the Bright Hope went down as the 17th transport ship to be taken out that day by the Imperial blockade. On a positive note, however, 2 decks remained intact, and a number of survivors, including Torren Farr, managed to escape through a combination of salvaged escape pods returning to the surface to await rescue and cutting deals with bounty hunters. Speaking of which, number 8. In this scene, during the Avengers refuse dump, we get the first shot of a FIRESPRAY 31 class patrol and attack craft, aka the Slave One. One of my favourites. So cool I could cry tears of and then used in this film by bounty hunter Boba Fett, it had previously belonged to his father/DNA template, Jango Fett, just prior to the Clone Wars. Manufactured by Kuat Systems Engineering, FIRESPRAYs were originally used by the Republic Correctional Authority to track down and rehabilitate dangerous criminals throughout the galaxy. They were also found patrolling and guarding the prison moon Uvo 4, home to the maximum security prison Desolation Alley, a penitentiary that was favoured by inmates due to the presence of the pod racing circuit contained in and around the prison. It was here that Jango Fett first acquired one of the prototype FIRESPRAYs and would later give it the name Slave One. After Jango's death in the first Battle of Geonosis, Boba took possession of the ship and would later go on to use it throughout the Clone Wars, later becoming an infamous bounty hunter, taking on jobs throughout the galaxy during the Imperial period, right up until we see the appearance of the ship here during the Galactic Civil War. The Slave One was well armed and, like all good personal starships, heavily modified to serve the pilot's needs. The ship's primary weapons were 2 heavy twin blaster cannons, as well as 2 rapid fire laser cannons. It was also equipped with homing missiles and a naval mine layer kitted out with seismic charges. A specialist feature of the ship, and one necessary for Fett's line of work, were the dummy proton torpedoes mounted with homing beacons and S-thread trackers. Once attached to a target ship, these allowed Fett to utilise his contraband HoloNet transceiver to track a ship's trajectory through hyperspace. My favourite aspect of the Slave One is the 90-degree difference between its landing and flying positions. The vertical design of its flying position is badass, and it's just a unique design that's fun to watch, and it no doubt takes quite a bit of extra skill to land with precision. Skills that Fett Man almost certainly possesses. Okay, some more honourable mentions before we move on. Upon arrival at Cloud City, we get the first look at a couple of Storm 4 twin-pod cloud cars. Built by Bespin Motors and powered by a repulsorcraft engine, these high-atmosphere craft patrolled the skies surrounding the city and were fitted with light blaster cannons. The wing guard pilots could sometimes be bribed into taking people for a spin around Cloud City, which I'd imagine are credits well spent. Another honourable mention, a little later on in the film, the Carbonite Storage Repulsorcraft. So, not technically a vehicle, but then you can technically ride in it, so it gets a mention. Originally designed for the safe transport of exotic high-pressure gases, like Tibanna gas, it was never intended to preserve a life form via carbon freezing, hence the uncertain experimental nature of its use in this film. Number 9. In this new scene we have a LAMBDA-CLASS T4A shuttle, also known simply as an Imperial shuttle. The ship was standard throughout the Galactic Empire and featured a trihedral wing design that could be found on a number of different ships in service during this time period. The ship was designed by Scion Fleet Systems to operate as both a cargo and troop transport, but could also be found ferrying dignitaries and officers. It was a direct successor to the Theta-class T2C shuttle, which was used by senators and officers during the Clone Wars. As such, the LAMBDA-CLASS was favoured by many Imperials, particularly upper echelon officers and personnel, as it offered a luxury that was absent in other vehicles, such as the TIE shuttle, but also due to its relatively heavy armament and shielding. With space for 20 passengers, the LAMBDA wasn't the largest shuttle in service at this time. Its counterpart, the Sentinel-class shuttle that I covered in the last video, was much larger, able to carry 75 passengers at a time. However, the LAMBDA was much more common throughout the ranks of the Empire, even having a line of militarised variants, such as the Delta-class, which boasted improved speed, manoeuvrability, shielding and hull strength. Number 10. Finally, the largest ship in this moderately sized rebel fleet at the end of the film here, an EF-76 NEBULON-B escort frigate, namely the Redemption. It's aboard this ship at the Haven rendezvous point that Luke is patched up and given a replacement hand after his fight with Vader. This is due to the Rebel Alliance refitting the Redemption with advanced medical facilities, making it the primary hospital ship. However, the rebels had many other uses for these kinds of frigates, which took advantage of their sophisticated sensor capability and deep space multi-frequency antennas. Nebulon escort frigates were often used as search and rescue ships or long-range scouts, or relied on to relay information to command ships during battle. Manufactured once again by Kuat drive yards, the frigate and others like it had made its way into the rebels' possession via capture during battle, outright theft, or Imperial defection. When operating as part of a smaller rebel task force, the Nebulon-B frigate often served as a command ship. The Redemption would later go on to serve in the Battle of Endor, and although coming under heavy fire from a squadron of TIE fighters, it was not destroyed and went on to flee the fight as the Death Star exploded. Years later, Kuat drive yards would follow up on its successful Nebulon-B design with a new class of starship, the Corona-class frigate, produced solely for and used throughout the New Republic. A brief behind-the-scenes tidbit here: the unique and memorable design of the Nebulon frigate was inspired by an outboard motor. So there we go, every ship that appears on screen in The Empire Strikes Back. But wait, what are these ships seen here as part of the Rebel fleet? Great question, and something I've always wondered myself. However, in all my years of waiting for them to be identified, they still haven't been, which is surprising given how fleshed out everything else in the Star Wars universe is. Going behind the scenes, my guess is in order to pad out such shots, ILM had to use every model they had to hand, hence why we see both X and Y wings, CR-90 corvettes and multiple transports alongside the frigate and the Falcon here at the end. It's likely that these other models were just constructed from non-discernible bits of metal and plastic into starship-like shapes in order to fill up the background scene. Regardless, no matter how indistinguishable, it's unlike the Star Wars machine not to have at least attempted to retroactively insert these vehicles into canon in some form, however minor. They're not even mentioned in the many reference books that have come out over the years. Oh well, it's just a film, right? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it somewhat entertaining and or educational, and as I said at the start, if you missed the video in which I covered all the starships that first appear in A New Hope, then definitely check that one out. It was fun to make, as was this one, and I'm off to make more. Thank you for watching, peace.